So yeah, I'm Ron LICHTY. I have been managing for 30 years at all of these companies, and as Mish said, I cut my teeth managing at Apple. I was a programmer for 8 years before that. I loved programming. I was really curious about management. I went back and forth between being a programmer and a manager 3 times before it finally stuck. I encountered Agile for the first time 20 years ago when I was at Charles Schwab. I began training teams in Agile about 10 years ago. I began training executives in Agile about 5 years ago. With my co-author, who's taking my picture right now, with my co-author, we wrote Managing the Unmanageable, my 5th book on managing software people and team. There's a gazillion books on managing projects. There's almost nothing on managing the people who deliver projects. And our publisher, Addison, Wesley & Pearson, convinced us to spend a week in a studio turning it into video training. So it's in video training, which is available to those of you with the O'Reilly Safari library for free. And I'm also the co-author of the study of product team performance. As Mish said, I am basically an engineering management fire jumper. I untangle nuts in software development. I help make software development hum, and I take on occasional VP of engineering roles. So I'm here to talk to you about management role, about the intersection, the confluence of Agile and management roles in Agile, because while some of the management roles that are traditional remain the same, some of them are truly inappropriate in Agile. And some of them change even dramatically, while others are brand new. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, because in Agile, we go from managers in charge to teams in charge. And that fundamentally changes things. Now, when we draw how it is that teams are built, we see that we draw teams and there's no manager in that picture. They're truly teams in charge. Managers still have roles, but it's a changed role. And the trouble for some of us is that our organizations don't realize that it's a changed role, and they think we still direct things. So that's one of the challenges. So I want to talk about what the manager's role is today. So when Mickey and I wrote our book, we broke it into 9 different categories of things. Only one of them is truly different. That last one, managing successful software delivery, is truly different in Agile than it was before. The rest of those are nuanced differences. We put together a chart of 50 traditional roles that managers have had for the purpose of looking at how do those roles change when we move from traditional management to Agile management. I'm not going to go through 50 of them today in 20 minutes, you can imagine. But I do want to talk about 7, and I want to talk about 7 of them, 4 of them that are either new or dramatically different, and 3 of them that should be the same as what we were doing before. And I'm going to start with scaling Scrum. So our previous speaker was just talking about scaling Scrum, and when we have a single Scrum team, this is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to see how to put together a Scrum team. It's when we scale to multiple teams that it gets hard. This is a manager role. The easy route is to split by components. It's a traditional way that things got done. We group like-minded people together. We put together people who use the same tools. We get all the database developers together. We get all the web developers together. We get all the business logic developers together. It sort of makes sense. The problem is that what we're delivering is not to our customers is not components. Our customers don't, for the most part. A couple of you may have customers who care about components. Most of us, our customers don't care about components. They care about functionality. And for most of us, functionality is made up of bits of all of those things, from web development through business logic development, through database development, through all of those things. And the only way we get those without high bandwidth inter-team communication is by creating teams that have all those functions on them, cross-functional teams. So we can look at, on the left, a traditional way of organizing software developers, where all the web developers report to a web manager, and all the database developers report to somebody who was a database developer, is now a database manager, to truly organizing cross-functional teams. That still have the web developers reporting to a web manager. It's just that's horizontal, and those web managers aren't on those teams. So I could spend a lot of time talking about scaling Scrum. I spent an hour talking about it in a webinar last week. I can point you to the recording of that if you want. Bring me a card afterwards, because I want to move on to talking about creating an Agile culture, which is really fundamental. So a number of people have talked about cultures today. Mickey and I in our book spent about two pages on each of three thought leaders in motivation and management theory. One of those is Maslow. Everybody knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This one is McGregor. McGregor in the 1950s said, stop doing, this is basically what our first keynote speaker this morning said, stop telling people what to do, start supporting people. And he was the guy who came up with Theory X and Theory Y management, where Theory X is telling people what to do, Theory Y is supporting your team instead, and he used words like enabling and empowering and developmental and continuous improvement. In the 1950s, words that Agile now uses to describe servant leadership, the role that it calls on all of us as managers to be. The rules of thumb, this one's from Agile Open California. Management sets the boundaries of what needs to be done and says to the team, I trust you to figure out how to get it done. Mickey and I collected 300 rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom in our book. It's the center section of our book. And one of those was the one that Jerry raised previously, trust but verify. Everybody know who said that? Who said that? Ronald Reagan. Who was he quoting? Vladimir Lenin. Not a lot of people know that. But trust but verify is the imperative, not to micromanage. It is the essence of delegation. It is about our jobs. It's about setting expectations and expected outcomes for teams. My own mantra for programming, for managing software development, is that software development is a team sport. And team sports thrive on two things, communication and collaboration. And we as managers have to create a culture of communication at every level. Even though we're not on those teams, we have to create that culture at every level within the team and across to all of the other teams in the organization. Kimberly Weefling said we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them in this ratio. So communication is not talking. It is 2/3 at least listening, maybe 4/5 or 9/10 listening. And my own rule of thumb regarding that is if we use that kind of listening and talking ratio, we cannot over-communicate. So I believe that maybe in sales they can over-communicate. Maybe in marketing they can over-communicate. I don't think in software development we can over-communicate. And as Jerry was saying, virtual teams, there's never enough communication. We absolutely have to commit to communicate with virtual teams. So we did a whole chapter on establishing culture. I'll leave it at that because I want to talk about supporting Agile values. Agile, in the Agile Manifesto, it begins, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer. I think that understates it. I think our highest priority is to delight the customer. And I think that's what we need to focus on. And so how do we do that? And so Agile practices come to mind. So is it Agile practices? Well, I listed a handful of Agile practices and asked the question, do each of these deliver value? And I walked through them and I look at them and every single one of these delivers value. But they don't by themselves make us agile. Much like voting machines don't make us a democracy, Agile practices don't make us agile. Being agile, like democracy, comes from Agile values and Agile principles. It comes from the Agile Manifesto and the values and principles that are listed in the Agile Manifesto. And we as managers need to value those principles and values over practices. I walk into organizations all the time that are doing the practices and not being agile. That's our challenge as managers, is to support Agile values. And then to empower self-organization and excellence. And I think this is a really hard one, because what is self-organization? So I thought of self-organization as every single member of the team can be a leader, including the intern. And then I read Google's study a couple of years ago so Google's got lots of money, they can study everything, and they do. And they studied, and they've got high performance teams and low performance teams, just like the rest of us. And they said, what differentiates their high performance teams from their low performance teams? And they realized that whether or not you've read the Aristotle study, whether or not you've read their study, you've heard those two words that have become very popular since then: psychological safety. And they described psychological safety in that study as everybody on the team speaks about an equal amount of time. It's not to say we don't honor the specialty or we don't honor the expertise of our architect or somebody who's been on the team longer than others by saying, oh, the intern speaks the same amount of time. It's that we honor everybody's expertise on the team. So if our self-organizing team were an acting troupe, what kind of acting would we do? Improv. If our self-organizing team were a music group, what kind of music would we do? Jazz. And it's because who's the leader? That leadership passes back and forth on that team. Unfortunately, improv and jazz don't give us good manager models. What gives us good manager models? So I was a director of engineering at Schwab. I wanted to be a VP of engineering. I was struggling to get that promotion, and I had a management coach who put a book in my hand and said, you have to read this. It was a book called Sacred Hoops by a guy who I'd never heard of named Phil Jackson. Some of you may have heard of Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was a coach. Phil Jackson was the coach of the Chicago Bulls. Phil Jackson inherited Michael Jordan, who was the only basketball player, I think, whose name I knew, who was setting, when Phil Jackson inherited the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan was setting every record in shooting, and the Chicago Bulls were losing. And his job was to create a team that won, not a player, a team that won. And he's written 2 books. I will point you to both of them. They're both wonderful, Sacred Hoops and 11 Rings. I didn't become a basketball fan until the Golden State Warriors won the championship the second time. And it occurred to me afterwards that maybe Steve Kerr actually played basketball. And I looked him up on Wikipedia, and oh my God, he played for Phil Jackson on the Chicago Bulls. So I'll move along. I've been asked this question in training, particularly 10 years ago when I started training teams in Agile. I got asked, are there projects not suitable for Agile? And I racked my brains trying to think of if was there some kind of software, and I was asking the wrong question. The question really is, are there cultures not suitable for Agile? Because the answer is yes. Micromanaged cultures are not suitable for Agile. Micromanagement, Agile asks everyone on the team to step up. Micromanagement causes everyone on the team to step back. Micromanagement disrupts Agile, it disrupts best teams, it prevents learning, it causes people to become order takers and not engaged in their products and engaged in delighting customers. Removing impediments. Now, all of you who've ever had Agile training know the answer to who removes impediments. Who removes impediments? Scrum Masters. Who do they escalate to? Managers, us. We are impediment removers, and we've always been impediment removers. Joe Kleinschmidt said, be a damper to the noise. We need to be a damper to the noise. There is a torrent of politics in our organizations that surround our teams. We have always been responsible for protecting our teams from all of that noise. And we need to protect team focus. We need to guard against the waste of multitasking and the waste both productivity-wise, joy-wise, and quality-wise that multitasking generates. Counseling, coaching, and mentoring is a traditional role for us as managers. And I thought when I first talked to managers about this topic, I thought that managers are going to say, oh, this doesn't change at all. And I had a whole bunch of managers who said, oh, this changes dramatically. It changes dramatically because I never had time to coach, mentor, or counsel when I was focused on delivery. And now I have time to do my job. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing. So I've got this picture here, not because I think that one of them's mentoring the other. I think they're actually pair programming. But I love this picture. And here are these words from Spotify. At Spotify, managers are focused on coaching, mentorship, and solving impediments rather than telling people what to do. I think that's fundamental. And then hiring and firing. So Mickey and I, when we did our very first interview after our book came out, the interviewer, so we've got 300 rules of thumb in the center of the book, and the interviewer said, so what's the most important rule of thumb out of those 300? And both of us, and it astonished both of us said, always be recruiting. That is possibly the most important thing that all of us need to focus on. It's a really hard job. And one of the reasons that we don't do it well is because we're scared that we may hire the wrong person. So I don't know about you, but I know that I have been. And that is part of our job too, dealing with problem employees. And we had a talk this morning, the second keynote on this. Dealing with problem employees, I had a coach who helped me with it. But it's fundamental that we have to be responsible for dealing with problem employees. Our teams, even though we're not on those teams, our teams all know when there's a problem employee. They all know that we have to deal with this. They all expect us to deal with this. They expect us by osmosis to know that they've got a problem on their team. So we have to be tuned into into all of the teams that we have people on in order to ensure that we deal with problem employees. So there's the list of things. So these are the list. This is the summary of what I just said, and I'll take questions if I've got time, Mish.
Yes, we'll move into questions now. Unless anyone wants a picture of this slide, we'll move into questions. All right, so the first question is, when you are doing a project for the first time with Agile processes, how do you project a realistic go-live date to set business expectations?
So I'm actually doing a workshop at, so this is the San Francisco Engineering Leadership Community. We have for 25 years had a Silicon Valley engineering leadership community of which I'm the co-chair, and occasionally I actually speak at it, and I'm doing a workshop in February on predictability in Agile. So come spend an hour with me and we'll talk about that, but relative estimating combined with velocity gives us dramatically better predictability than anything that I did in my waterfall days. And I had waterfall days. To my chagrin. I would say one other thing, which is with non-stable teams that don't have any history of velocity, you don't have anywhere to start with. It's the same as we did in waterfall days. It's only as the team begins to deliver. They deliver one sprint, you've got some velocity, 2 sprints, we've got more, 3 sprints, now we've got something we can average, and the team's beginning to do that. Forming, norming, storming, performing, I hope I got those in the right order, thing that begins to generate stability and performance.
All right, great. How about, what do you think about managers serving as Scrum Masters?
Generally a bad idea, having managers serve as Scrum Masters. So the goal of Scrum Masters is to facilitate, so I'm going to say it's a bad idea, but it's also, it's the same bad idea as having project managers become Scrum Masters. And that's not necessarily a bad idea either. So if you look at project managers, it's a gamut. And at one end, it's a group of people who visit the team 3 times a day to ask, is it done yet? At the other, it's a group of people who are fundamentally about getting people to work together effectively. At that end, those people become good Scrum Masters. At that end, we managers become good Scrum Masters. We are better Scrum Masters if we are Scrum Masters of teams in which no one works for us on the team, in which we're not writing a performance review for anybody on that team, in which we can focus on their working together rather than them being scared of saying something that will affect their performance review.
All right, so I think we have time for one more question. Since managers are not part of Agile teams or Scrums, how can they collect or provide feedback about or to direct reports? 360 reviews, peer review, one-on-one, what else?
Yes, yes, and yes, and to that last set of things. And we've still got management groups. Those horizontal groups are still there. We've still got the opportunity to have staff meetings to create communities of practice across. So if I was a web developer and I become the web manager, to create a community of practice across all of web development. If I was a database developer and now have become the manager of the database group, to create a community of practice across that group. And I'm going to bring those folks together both for creating a community of practice and for sharing those best practices and for sharing with me how things are going on their teams. And then we as managers have to work together to solve problems.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your talk today, Ron.